Hey everyone, due to some of the storms we've been having in our area, we are currently without internet at the church. With this being a sort of last minute situation, we were unable to plan for a live stream service tonight. So I thought instead of canceling service, that instead I would share a conversation I had with some pastor friends of mine less than a month ago after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. It's crazy to me that this conversation took place less than a month ago, but in that time things have not gotten better when it comes to racial issues, they've gotten worse. With our country facing protests and riots over the murder of George Floyd last week, this has become arguably the most important conversation facing our nation today. I believe that it is crucial that the church have a perspective on these issues. I believe that this is a conversation that is close to the heart of God. So tonight, I wanted to share this conversation between three different pastors from three different churches with three different realities. My hope is that we will come to this conversation with ears to hear and hearts to receive. My prayer is that the church begins to take a good, long look in the mirror and we begin to realize that we have a lot of room to grow when it comes to equality. That when the Bible tells us that God so loved the world, it meant the world. It meant people that didn't look like you. It means the person that you don't agree with politically. It means that if all people meant enough to the heart of God that he would send his son to die for them, that we need to be willing to die for them as well. To lay down our bias, our preconceptions, our upbringing, and our agendas, to learn to live like love as one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Church, we have to learn to listen if we want to make it. We have to learn to empathize and come to the table of reason together. Because more than just the coronavirus threatens our nation right now, we also face the disease of racism. By God's grace and the power of the Holy Spirit, let us learn to come together and take a stand against it because unity is our immunity. I hope this conversation helps you. I hope you learn, and I hope you come away a little bit closer to being unified with the brothers and sisters that God has placed in your life. Love you guys. Enjoy.
My name is Jason Edouard. I'm a pastor down here in the same county with Pastor Daniel. I'm the connection pastor at our church down here in Fort Myers, Florida, at Life Church, and been married to my beautiful wife for 9 years now, and have 3 kids. One of them we're doing a birthday party for today, and two girls and a boy, and just love the Lord, love our city, love our pastors, and I love conversations like this.
Amen.
So, pleasure to meet you, brother.
Amen. Likewise. So my name's Clement. I pastor a church in London. So I'm born and raised London, South London. I'm an Englishman. In fact, my granddaughter will be 3rd generation born in Britain, and so that's an interesting challenge for her.
Yeah.
And so married for 24 years. Been with my wife now for about 25, 26 years. 4 children, 1 granddaughter. And been pastoring for 20-something years. And through the ups and downs and the trials of ministry. And so it's all good. Obviously, America's racial reconciliation or challenges are slightly different to what we have here in the UK. But I'm sure there's some similarities, and I'm sure we can get into that. And there's some great conversations around that as well. We're also having conversations with this stuff in England because of the lack of guns we have.
Yeah.
Typically, the results aren't as catastrophic.
Right.
But for sure, we certainly have some of the same challenges, and there's conversations being had around that in the UK all the time.
So I wanted to get you guys. I was just kind of talking to Jason before you popped on, Pastor Clement. I just wanted to get you guys in and talk with you because I feel like there's something more that the church should be doing when it comes to these conversations. And I can't really speak for what it's like in Britain, Pastor Clement, but I think that in America, I think the church has gotten really political. And because of our political ideologies, in a lot of cases, it kind of ties our hands when it comes to having conversations on race. And I think that the church needs to have a voice when it comes to the subject. I think that we need to take a stand. I think that the world should not be leading the charge in the obliteration of racism. I think that the church needs to blaze a trail there. And I think it starts with conversations like this. So as a white pastor, I want to sit here and have a conversation with you guys where I listen, because I think a lot of our problem is that we're not listening. When something like this happens, we just jump to our conclusions that we have a perspective, we have a bias, and we hear a
Yep.
story like this and we just kind of jump to a response. And I think
Yeah.
that we need to kind of stop and listen. So I want to talk to you guys, ask a couple questions, and just listen to what you guys have to say in your perspective.
Go for it.
I don't know if you want to start off with something or if you want me to just get right into a couple questions.
No, I mean, just to say well done for having this. I mean, on my Facebook feed, it's interesting. I've had more white people post what's happened in the States than black people.
Right.
So it's very interesting. And I think, more than just listening, though that's very good, that's a good first step. I think that if the issue is going to have a real chance of success, then I think the white community certainly needs to be more vocal about it.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? They need to see it for what it is, and they need to speak out, because like with anything, whenever there's a minority situation, the minority voice is not enough.
Right.
I was thinking about this earlier on. Think about apartheid in South Africa with Mandela. It wasn't the ANC that defeated the apartheid movement. It was the international community.
Right.
It was when Britain and the rest of the world started banning the South African cricket team, rugby team. They couldn't go to the Olympics. You couldn't do business with them. It took a coalition of voices, and actually the international voices spoke the loudest, or their voice was heard greater.
Right.
And that's certainly what needs to take place in this situation, is that I think there needs to be a broader coalition of voices, and we need voices to speak truth to power.
Right. That's good. Jason, you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I absolutely second that. Oftentimes, my experience is that when one is having an experience, whether it be a minority or be an individual or whatever the case may be, there are times where it could be ascribed to, well, that's just your experience. That's just whether you're making it up or you're living out of the past. We're in the current, we're in the future. You're essentially that experiences are made up, while there are some aspects of experiences that are just the reality that we're going through. I think, like what Pastor Clement said, when we brought in the task force, when we brought in the people who are willing to step into someone else's experience, that really creates something new. And I want to thank you and commend you and many others who are really stepping up and wanting to learn more about our experience.
Yeah, Pastor Jason, I remember one time seeing a sermon from you that you did at your church, where you kind of had an illustration about how people couldn't understand, kind of like your life experience. Would you kind of like walk us through that briefly? Because I thought it was so powerful and I saw it.
Absolutely. So there is I don't know, maybe a sector of church. I'm not sure if it would be considered a buzzword anymore, but part of the church is verbally intentional about being multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-generational. And the scripture talks about how Christ came to separate the dividing walls between Jews and Greeks. And although there are multicultural worship services, I wonder and I believe that Christ has called us to far more than multicultural church services, but actually to be multicultural in the sense of the relational connections that we experience. So what my experience at sometimes in Life Church, we consider ourselves to be a multicultural, multi-generational, multi-ethnic church as well. And that's one of the things that when people come, it really impresses them. It captivates them because you see from great grandparents to brand newborns, and you see many different people from different socioeconomic statuses. You see white, you see black, you see Caribbean, you see Asian, you see South American, you see African. So if we're just taking the vantage point of looking from the outside looking in, it may seem like there was a great sense of multiculturalism, and multicultural goes far deeper than the people who are sitting in the seats, but are those cultures welcomed in the expressions of the church? And are those cultures welcomed necessarily even to have an influence and an impact on the lives of the people who are in those seats that are different than one another. So the point that I was attempting to make in that message was that I believe that the church has an opportunity to, beyond attending services together, actually exploring the realities, the hurts, the pains, the cares, the concerns, the victories, the dreams, the motivations, and the visions of people who have either a different background or could be different than them in any of the ways that we've already mentioned.
So I wanted to talk as well, just because I think that there's a lot to learn in this moment, because it feels like it took 100 of these stories before, one kind of caught the attention of the nation and got everybody. I mean, for the most part, we can point to outliers. There are outliers that, are not wanting to accept the fact that this is a pretty cut and dry situation from everything it appears. I mean, we still believe in due process. We want these people to go to court and, face a judge and a jury of their peers. But this is as cut and dry as it comes. And I feel like without that cell phone footage of, the shooting, that we might not find ourselves in this place of unity against division. And why does it take something to be so cut and dry, like so obvious, so in your face, for people to finally come into unity on the fact that this is a problem and it needs to be addressed?
So that's very interesting, because I was thinking about that earlier on. The big game changer of the last 10, 20 years hasn't been the narrative of minority groups or Black people, because actually we're still saying the same things we've always said. The big game changer has been video phones, camera phones.
Right. And I guess it kind of all goes back to like Rodney King in like LA. That was like one of the first real things that was caught on video.
There we go. Right, there you go. But now when that guy just happened to be testing out his camera.
Right.
On
but
that
it's like
night.
A giant chunky thing.
That's right, with a big old one.
Yeah.
And it's in one way, it's a shame, because now what people do, the first time there's any sense of drama, they pull out their phones. And if I'm correct, the guy who was filming it was actually a part of the group, right?
Yeah. To my understanding, yeah.
Wow. So that's another thing to blow your mind in. But now what's happening is that you got the video, which has been, validating the voices.
Yeah.
People have always said so. And they say, oh, well, that's just your story. It's your word against his word. It's your word against the officer's word. And we all know the phrase, dead men tell no tales.
Right.
So when there's a fatality, there is no other voice other than oftentimes the oppressor's voice.
Right.
And that's what makes the video footage so powerful, because without it, imagine if we was reading this.
Right.
Whose perspective are we going to read? It's those who are alive. The dead guy has no way of communicating this.
Right.
And so, which makes you think, if this is what it's like now, how has it been for the last 50 years, 60 years? How many violations have taken place in the past? And so this video footage is the game changer. CCTV, camcorders, mobile phones with cameras, because it's given a validation to some voices of it almost feels like a sermon I'm about to write in my head. The validation of the voices of the victims. There you go, 3 points right there.
Dude, that's alliteration that kills right there.
That's right, because without it, we wouldn't know. It's the video footage of the guy in the States saying, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's the video footage, oftentimes, of the officers or the oppressors that we see that's shocking.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. How big is it in the States? Is it number one news over there?
It's pretty big, but I wouldn't say it's number one. We're still under, the whole COVID-19 thing. So I think that there's a statement that I heard a while back. It's the person's toothache affects them more than the famine in Africa that kills millions. It's kind of the same situation here. People are in quarantine. People are, facing a virus. And so I don't think it's as big of a story as it should be. I think it needs to be a bigger conversation. I love what you said about how video footage changes things, because it actually did in this situation. This happened in February. Like, I found out about it like just 2 days ago, and I was shocked because I found out about it by watching the footage
Yeah.
And it's all over the place now because the video came out. But
Yeah.
it happened in February, and nobody was charged for
Yeah.
2 months
Yeah.
because the video didn't come out. And then when the video comes out and people see it, then they push people to action, which shows that the system wasn't working.
That's right.
There was
So-
no due process.
That's right. So there must have been dozens of professionals and law enforcement that viewed that footage.
For sure.
Why did they not see what everyone else sees? What was it? What did they see when they saw that? What did they not see when they saw that?
Right.
That, as you said, it's funny, you made the comment cut and dry.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, your confidence in the system is a lot different to mine. I would be very surprised if these guys get found guilty for this. They're going to come up with some. The father's an ex-policeman, right?
Yeah, which makes it worse.
Okay, so he already gave a narrative which convinced those law enforcement officers, those legal professionals who view that. He has already given a narrative that they all agreed with.
Yeah.
Right? So it's already gone through several layers of law professionals. Lawrence saying, okay, we've heard his story. We've seen the video. We're not going to arrest him.
Right.
So this idea that because there's a public outcries are powerful.
Yeah.
They get things done. But at the same time, I am not hopeful that these men will receive the justice they receive, just as all the other cases where it was cut and dry.
Yeah.
You know, it's cut and dry when George Zimmerman pulls a gun on Trayvon Martin. You know, you're stalking the guy. The 911 dispatcher says, leave him alone, don't follow him. So, yeah, and it's interesting. It's always about perception.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being perceived to be, in those two cases at least, you're looking at someone and you are perceiving something, which is far different to the reality. Right. I mean, apparently this guy's just jogging. Are you kidding me? In the lockdown in England, one of the only reasons you can leave your house is for exercise. Everyone's jogging.
Right.
The idea that you would see a black guy jogging and then somehow think, well, there's a burglary, these two things are connected. Seriously, it's just mind blow.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a mind, you know, it's a mind trap. It wrenches your brain to think that you can be shot. Well, and there's always, it's like the guy who got shot in his own apartment because the off-duty policewoman went into the wrong apartment.
Yeah.
Come on, how many excuses, you know?
And then even in that situation, they tried to turn it back on him because he had like marijuana in the house or something like that. As
right, and so we are all waiting for the demonization of the victim.
Right. They've already released that he shoplifted a couple years ago, and I'm like, yeah,
he has a past.
Yeah, like he stole it. He stole
go.
a box of Pop-Tarts, and so he deserves to be shot while he's jogging.
That's right. And that's the same they did with Trayvon Martin. It's the same thing they did. I mean, the guy is shot in his own apartment.
Right.
I mean, I've replayed that in my mind so many times.
Yeah.
Okay. How impossible is it for you to go into the wrong? As soon as you open the door, you know it's not your apartment.
Yeah.
Your shoes aren't there. Your coat's not hanging there. The decoration's different. But you see what happened there is that the police officers that came as a result of that, they started hugging her. They were counseling her. They were putting their arms around her.
Yeah.
She was sobbing into the arms of her fellow officers. And so you watch that and you're like, well, shouldn't you be hugging the victim's family? And so, yeah, I mean, I know she got 10 years eventually, but even that, 10 years, she'll be out in 5 or 7 for good behavior.
Right. So,
I mean,
I mean, it's awful. I mean, I do think there's a little bit of a difference between that situation and then deliberately hunting somebody down that's jogging. But
absolutely, but it's all part of this perception, though. It's all part of, you see someone who's not the similar color and you react. So, I mean, seriously?
Yeah.
The time from her trying to get into her apartment, what she thought was her apartment, to the time the guy died, even if it's only 60 seconds, how long do you need to recognize this is not your apartment? It's a split second.
Yeah. And I wanted to, that kind of like brings something up in my mind. Pastor Clement, we've talked before on like even the concept of like white privilege before. You and I have kind of had that discussion. And, I don't know how much of that concept I totally buy into, but one thing that I know for sure is like, this is something I know with confidence. As a white man, if I get pulled over by the police, I have zero fear of reaching into my pocket to pull out my wallet. Like I've got
That's white
zero fear.
privilege.
Right.
And that is exactly what white privilege is that you are not fearful of things that other people are constantly on their guard.
Right.
There's an American sitcom called Blackish. I'm not sure if you guys have ever watched it.
A little bit.
Anthony Anderson.
So there's a scene when the lift door opens and there's this little white girl, right? This little white kid. She's 6 or 7 years old and she's lost and she's in the lift.
Yeah.
That's every black man's nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And so Andre Johnson sees it and he doesn't touch her. He just lets the lift door close and he runs.
Yeah.
And when he's telling someone else about what happened, they says, "What? You didn't?" Yeah, because we all know. We all know the potential, misinterpretation of that. Right. And so we are constantly thinking of how we always have to read the room.
Right. So I want to ask Jason something. Interesting thing between the both of us is we both have young sons named Roman. And it's awesome. But like, I just couldn't help but think about how we're going to have to, just in the country, we're going to have to raise them differently. You know what I mean? Like, I probably will not have to teach my Roman that you need to look at the crime statistics in a neighborhood before you go exercise in it. That might be a conversation that you have to have with your son. And that is not right. That's not fair. What is it like for you as a father to have to raise your Roman differently than I have to raise my Roman? What does that mean to you?
So it really takes a lot of leaning and trusting in God, and not allowing myself and my wife to be controlled by fear, and also recognizing the reality of the world that we live in. We must exercise wisdom and caution. So my wife, she is a Caucasian, and through my relationship with her and through a relationship with the other members of my family and friends and documentaries and stories that she's hearing, she really is aware, more so than many people who aren't of the Black community. In my experience, I think that she is more aware of the realities of the challenges that we experience than many people are. So for her and I, they are conversations that we genuinely have. Now he's 8 months old, so we haven't yet had to teach him anything.
Sure.
But in terms of the reality that there are going to be conversations that we need to have with him, it is a challenge, and fear is a real possibility. And for us, we're committed just to walking in God's love, teaching him that we can be wise, we can be cautious, and we don't have to walk in fear. Now, we do have friends who have sons who are older than us. One friend in particular used to live in Kentucky, and the reason that they moved out of Kentucky into Florida is because amongst many racial challenges they experienced, there was a student in the class of their oldest son who is now 8, and they were great friends. And then one day, their son's friend told him that they could no longer be friends and that he could no longer play with my son's friend because of the color of his skin. And that traumatized him. And he came home and he said, "Mommy, my friends told me this, and what's this about?" And then there was even a spirit that began to torment him, and he would be in the bathroom trying to wash his skin, rub his skin, because there was a spirit of hatred that was tormenting him. So that breaks my heart. And in some ways, over the past number of years, I have found myself in some ways growing callous and cold to the reality of the experience of people in the Black community, because it hurt so bad and it was so painful that I thought that if I could convince myself that I was indeed making it up, as some people suggested, then the pain would go away. And the pain just wouldn't go away. So for my wife and I, we recognize that there are conversations that we are going to need to have. Haven't exercised those conversations yet, just because of the ages of our children, and we are preparing to have those conversations.
So let me just say something in response to that real quickly before you jump in, Daniel. It's interesting. So I didn't know that your wife was white, but she's going to see things she's never seen before, if she hasn't done so already.
Oh, she has.
So, I've never heard a sermon. Actually, let me just wind this back. I was part of a network for 20 years, never heard a sermon on racism. Yeah. I preached on racism one time in 20 years. And the pushback I got afterwards was unbelievable. It was like, why would you preach on racism? And my response was, because racism is a sin, and the Bible dealt with racism. And, the Bible, as you said, bring down the walls of division. What was interesting in this, it was a conference, and a number of white people whose spouses were black or minority ethnic came up to me and says, you need to preach more on that stuff. Come on, that is so true. I see it as well. And it was very interesting. So none of the black people said it to me, because they're like, yeah, you're not saying anything we don't know. But it was interesting. I'll never forget one particular wife. A wife, she came up to me and goes, it is so true. And I never knew it until I married my husband. I never saw it until I married my husband. So that's why the conversation's so powerful. And we need to be having these conversations and, tossing, because it is a complicated issue in one sense. It's a very simple issue in another sense, but in another sense, it is very complicated and it's multi-layered.
Yeah.
So, just want to throw that in.
So even in terms of like how we raise our children and just like the stance that we are taking as a community, we also recognize that we are kingdom citizens first, and we are everything else afterward. Right. So although in the natural, there are areas in which our ancestors and our community and sometimes ourselves, we have been and are being victimized, we must also understand that we have victory in Christ. Yes. So if we allow the reality of our natural situation of being victimized overtake the reality and identity that we are victors and more than conquerors in Christ, then we're missing the kingdom. And I think a tension and a challenge is spiritually, conditionally, we are seated in heavenly places with Christ and we are victorious. And in the natural, we're experiencing the results of evil in this world. So that's really a tension that is challenging to navigate.
Yeah. So here's the real challenge. Sorry. What happens when the greatest form of racism you've ever received happens in the church? That's the problem. I hear what you're saying, but what happens when it's a church leader or a church elder?
So I think that's really where the church. That's why we have to, as a church, come together and take a stance on it, and not back down from it. There's a time. Our church is pretty ethnically diverse. We have a lot of Hispanics in our church, and there was a situation where we sang a Spanish song in our worship service. We're an English-speaking church, sang a Spanish song. And there was an argument that took place outside afterwards with our worship leader, who is Hispanic. And somebody from our church had gone up to him and said, hey, don't you dare sing in Spanish. This is America. You sing in English. So I felt like with that, like normally in situations like that, I would go to the person directly and address it. But I felt like that people had heard it. I felt like I want to take a stance on this as a church on what we believe. So the next week I got up to speak and I was like, hey, I'm going to talk about racism today. Because you might get all up in your feelings about this is America, and like our zip code might be 33936, which is in Lehigh Acres, Florida, one of the states of the United States. But the minute you drive onto this property, you're driving onto like holy ground, because we are ambassadors of heaven on earth. And in heaven there is no race or creed or anything like that. So we need to come together. The Bible says that we are all adopted into God's family. We're all a part of that same family. And so we need to put this tribalism aside. Tribalism is not of God. God made us all as one people, as his children.
From one blood.
And that's the mentality that we need to have. So I think that the church needs to come out hard against that, in the same way that if one of your children did something that was unkind to another child, if one of your children did something that was racist or something like that, you would deal with it swiftly. Hopefully you deal with it swiftly and strongly, and make sure that they knew that that's not the behavior that's acceptable in your house. And I think that the church needs to take that same swiftness when we see racism take place within our walls.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Great.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I'm really horrified by, is just the fact that I think that Christians find themselves on the wrong side of this argument so often. And we find ourselves getting outraged about the wrong things. I see we have a limited amount of credibility and we expend it in all the wrong areas. Like Christians will become keyboard warriors because Disney has a gay character in its movies, but they're silent when a black man is shot in his car reaching for his phone when he's pulled over from a police officer. And I think that the church needs to realize that we have allowed political narratives and we've allowed opinions and biases to allow us to get indignant about something that is really inconsequential. So what if a secular company wants to have a gay character in their movie when you have somebody in your community that was gunned down for no crime other than they were the wrong color in the wrong area at the wrong time?
Absolutely.
That's a battle that we can fight and we should fight.
Yeah. So what I make up about that is, like we said, there are many issues that are politicized.
Sure.
And there are political parties that capitalize on tragedies such as this to further their own initiative.
Right.
And my experience of church, and I'm even guilty of it myself, is sometimes we take the position that what others have done improperly or poorly, we must not do it all. So if it's like I'm not sure where you guys are like doctrinally on all these things, but some people are like, okay, well, they have done tongues totally poorly, so we're not going to do tongues at all. Or they've done prophecy poorly, so we're not going to do prophecy at all. Right. And then because there are people out there that are, or the people groups that are capitalizing on situations such as this for their own personal gain. The fear may be, if we also have a position about it, it may seem like we're coming into alignment with people and groups that are purposely using this for their own platform.
Right. Would you have any thoughts on that, Pastor Clement?
Yeah. So I was just making some notes because something you said earlier on triggered me. So I was just writing some of those thoughts down before I forget them. Yeah, I think you're right. There are people that can jump on the bandwagon, that can, it's like you said, it becomes a political thing. I think in America, someone wrote, I actually shared an article about what happened. And one of the comments was, it must be election time. And that's the way how people want to relegate it to, this is going to be a topic. It's being brought up only because there's elections coming up. And, and I'm sure, I saw Joe Biden post a comment. I saw Bernie Sanders post a comment. Unfortunately, I don't think I saw anything from Trump yet. Hopefully Trump will post something soon.
I had heard he said something, but I think he said something about it being disturbing, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some people who are going to jump on the bandwagon and use this for their own particular ends. Again, I think America is probably, a lot of America is probably not aware how the rest of the world sees them on this subject. I think it has something to do with the psyche of America. The racism factor is one thing. I think the gun culture plays into it as well.
Yeah.
And I know that's that's a hot topic, and I've had many debates. We don't have guns. Well, we have guns in Britain. We have more guns today in Britain than we've ever had. We have more armed police officers than we've ever had. I have been stopped by armed policemen for speeding as I'm on my way to church. They put on the blue lights just as I pulled up outside my building. I mean, we had a laugh, we had banter. It was, I said, if you don't give me a ticket, I'll pray for you, because I was late for church, and they both laughed. They said, "All right, make sure you pray for us," and that was it. It's and so again, the reason I said racism is multi-layered, because there's levels to this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's levels. Some person's racism may manifest and they don't want to sit next to you.
Yeah.
Some person's racism or racist attitude might manifest themselves where you might get passed over a promotion.
Right.
I think the problem you have there in the States is that a lot of people's racist behavior manifests normally in a minority being killed. Mm-hmm. The consequences of that racism is a lot more cataclysmic than it is in other parts of the world. And I, for one, I'm not so sure America understands how the rest of the world views this issue. Mm-hmm. And it is a difficult issue, and it's rooted in American history. It's rooted in slavery. It's rooted in the repercussions and the after effects. The idea that you could have slavery for a period of time, end it, and everything be normal. Yeah. No way. There are inherited, and by the way, I don't think people are racist by nature. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right? It's just behavior. I mean, kids. I've seen my kids play with any other kid, irrespective of skin color. Right. And it's interesting when you're talking about your Roman, Jason, that how old are they? 8?
No, Roman's 8 months old.
Oh, okay. All right. What was the kid that you said someone told them they couldn't play with him because of the color?
Yeah, that was a friend.
Right. Okay. How old were they, roughly? Do you know?
I would say between 6 and 8 at the time.
Right. Okay. So in other words, prior to that, they were fine, as most kids are.
Mm-hmm.
So someone's had to indoctrinate them. Someone's had to transmit their racism to that child. Yeah. And so whilst we're all sinners by nature, and I'm sure, sin, when it comes to our kids, we have a great opportunity to teach them not to be racist, right? But somehow they inherit other people's racism.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I love that you brought that up, because that was something I wanted to talk about. We're all pastors, and we believe that the Bible teaches us how to live. In the Bible, it says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's older, he won't depart from it. And we take verses like that, and we see it like when we think about it, we're thinking about somebody raising up their child in a positive way to love God, honor God, love their neighbor as themselves. But then here we see a father that brought up his child in a way, and then it manifested itself in the most horrifying way possible, where they go together and as a father and son commit murder against somebody of another race for no reason whatsoever, other than, I can assume, I don't know their heart, but I think it's pretty obvious that they had a prejudice that caused them to pick a guy that did not look like a burglar at all. He was jogging. The only thing that he had was their bias of, he's black, he's in our neighborhood, something's missing, it must be him. And because of the way that young man was raised up, now he's my age, going with his dad and taking somebody's life. And I think that for us, like what you said, absolutely, I don't think that racism is something we're born with. I think that we're all born in a sin nature, and our sin nature, there are some things that we're born with. I believe that we're born with hate. I believe that we're born with anger, things like that. But then racism is taught, and it's nurtured into us by the biases that we're surrounded with. So as parents, what is our responsibility to raise up our children at the way that they should go, so that this kind of thing doesn't happen in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you want to raise your kids in a very equitable state and an equitable situation with a mindset. Right. But I would imagine, I mean, Jason can speak into this a bit more. I've been asked before. I've been asked this question on the radio station. Right. If I was in America, would I vote for Trump? Okay. And I'm saying, well, that's not such an easy question to ask, because it's very contextualized and I have to put myself there, yada, 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 yada. But I said to them, I don't think I would be as easily negative towards him as some other people are. All right. So I would imagine if I was raising my kids, especially my son in America, I would be very concerned about him. In other words, it's not just a question of, son, we're all made in the image of God. All men are created equal, blah, blah. Yeah, we have that conversation. But then there would be another part of conversation. Hey, son, you better be careful. Be careful where you're going. You need to know what's going on in front of you. Be careful what's going on behind you. I mean, I get pulled over by the police. And I want to be honest with you. I don't think I've ever had a ticket in 20-something years. Do you know what I'm saying? Well, that's because I'm working hard at disarming them. I'm going to be funny. I'm going to be humorous. Right. You have to really work. I've been stopped by the police in America. Right. Multiple times.
We need to have a conversation on why you keep on getting pulled over. I think I've been pulled over 4 times in my whole life. How fast?
All right, man. That's another conversation, another time, right?
We don't have the Autobahn here. That's in Europe.
Well, that's the thing, you see. Your speed limits are in kilometers where they were in Arizona. And I thought they were miles and that. You guys got these big roads. I've got this rental vehicle. I'm going to put my foot down. So,
not your fault.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm trying to say. And so the conversations I have in England are actually relatively straightforward. It is what it is. You treat all people the same, but there are an element of people out there that are going to judge you because of the color of your skin. Right. You know, as black people, I've always taught you've got to work twice as hard to be considered an equal. That it's not enough. It's not enough just to be doing what everyone else is doing. If everyone else is getting an B, you've got to get an A. Yeah. If everyone else is getting an A, you've got to get an A star. In other words, because life is unbalanced and unfair, and the society is, you have to be being the same as others. Mediocrity is not an option. Right. Right. You have to work twice as hard, twice as whatever, to be, and even then, there's a chance that that's not going to be enough for some people. Right. And so that's how I would raise my kids in my context.
Do you guys feel like there's a double standard that's applied to the black community that's not applied to the white community? So I that's kind of maybe an easy setup question, but I mean, for me, a great example is, you know, we've seen the situation happen a lot. We've seen a broad range of responses. When things like this happen, on the far end of it, you have riots, which have happened in our country many times as a result of a racial injustice. And then you get all the way down to the low side of it. And I think an example of that would be like Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem. And when there's riots, it's wrong, because we shouldn't riot. And I think we can maybe all get behind that maybe that's not right. Even though for us as a parent, if my kid's life was taken and justice wasn't being served, I can't promise that I'm not going to go and burn something down. But then we go all the way to this guy who kneels during the national anthem. It's like, well, you can't protest this way. You can't protest that way. Yeah. You can't protest that way. That's not respectful to the flag. It's like, and if we're being honest, like, he's making a statement, the system isn't working for us. And so he's taking a knee in the most peaceful way he possibly can to get that point across. And then we see a situation like this where an ex-cop murders somebody jogging in his neighborhood, talks to his cop buddies, and doesn't get arrested, doesn't get charged, nothing like that happens. And we have to acknowledge the system isn't working. So if they can't protest by riots, if they can't protest by being vocal, if they can't protest by being silent and taking a knee, how are they allowed to protest? Like, what's the acceptable way?
That's what I mean by Americans being aware of how they're viewed by outsiders. Right. So over here in England, we think taking the knee is respectful. We don't see that as a form of disrespect, and we're confused.
But we do too in America. Like, we take a knee before a football game. You know what I mean? Like, taking a knee is a sign of respect. And this is my personal opinion. I fully believe that it wasn't the fact that he took a knee. It's the fact that he took a knee for a specific reason. And it was people having a contention with the reason he took the knee, and not so much that he took the knee. That's my contention. Somebody can fight me on that, I guess.
Yeah, over here, we're like, what's the problem? The guy's taking a knee. I mean, we have had, so for example, we had the climate protesters recently. And they were jumping on trains and stopping thousands of people going to work. And people were dragging them. There's footage on the YouTube. People were jumping onto the trains, chasing them, dragging them off the train, and the mob descended on them. and the police came in and said, you guys can't do that. These guys are entitled to their right to protest.
Right.
And so it seems like if you want to protest the environment, climate change, the G8, you can pretty much lock down the city, a capital city. You can pretty much cause the government to spend millions of pounds on law enforcement, protect them. But if you want to protest police brutality to people of the same kind of skin of yours, even kneeling down. And so you're right, that's a great question. What is an acceptable way? But you see, protest isn't meant to be acceptable. To be effective in your protest, you are meant to be disruptive. You are meant to, in England, cities that have riots get a lot of money poured into them by the government straight afterwards.
Right.
Because that's the way you really get the government's attention. You cause a riot, you tear up a load of stuff, and then they have all their meetings, all their inquiries, all their consultations. Without a shadow of doubt, they then earmark money out of the budget for regeneration, for schools, for hospitals, typically a lot of the things they should have done before the riot.
Right.
And so I'm not so sure that, I think once the topic is disagreeable with a lot of people, the way you protest, they're always going to find problems with it, because you can't appease the ones who are oppressing you.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you guys this: if there is that double standard, where for certain people they can go and protest and it's not looked at as aggressive or they need to calm down, to where, and you. I'm not saying it doesn't exist anywhere else, but you see it disproportionately when, in Black Lives activism rather. So if somebody gets up and says Black Lives Matter, immediately somebody comes to the conversation and says, no, all lives matter. No, Blue Lives Matter. It's like, nobody is saying that police lives don't matter or that all lives don't
They're
matter.
missing the point.
But yeah, and it's like showing up to somebody's mom's funeral and seeing them grieving and saying, hey, listen, you don't have a right to grieve because my dad just died a couple weeks ago. It's like, whose funeral are we at? You know what I mean? Like, I can come to your dad's funeral and, try and, interrupt your bereavement here. So why can't we have that conversation? Why do we keep on changing it back? Why do you guys think that is?
I think because it is offensive. It is offensive to the narrative and the paradigm that we've believed about the culture that we exist in. Sometimes we have a utopian or a fantastical view of the culture that we exist in. And when we consider issues of racial tension or racial injustice, we consider those as things that were terrible in the 1800s, pretty bad in the 1960s, and only sporadic, if existing at all, in our day. And being faced with the reality, or in some ways, maybe let me say the possibility, that racial injustice is actually still a severe problem in our nation and in other nations in the world. That bears a sense of responsibility for people that I'm not sure people are willing to engage with.
Yeah. And I actually think it's those who are not willing to engage with the real issues. They are really the major part of the problem. So, for example, when Black Lives Matter first came out and gained some prominence, the amount of people I saw, all these other lives matter. It's like you're missing the point. It's like what Daniel's articulated. I mean, maybe they should have said Black Lives Matter as well. Right?
Yeah, but then you're getting semantical about it, right?
Yeah, but it's like any person with any IQ would have understood what they were trying to say. They're trying to say, listen, everyone else's lives seem to matter, and we're just trying to let you know that Black lives matter.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's not that we think Black lives matter more than everyone else's.
Yeah.
But whenever you raise a protest movement, you always focus the attention on the thing you're protesting about.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so for someone to come along and say, well, you shouldn't say Black lives matter, that's racist, all lives matter, blah, 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 etc., then those people are the problem, because actually they're being colorblind.
Right.
Intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
They are intentionally not seeing it the way it should be seen.
Right. So what I've typically found, tell me if you guys have found this to be true as well, is that people don't hear logic when they're emotional. So, I mean, maybe you can think of maybe a time that you've been in an argument with somebody and what they're saying is true, but you're emotionally compromised. And so you can't hear the validity of what they're trying to say. I believe that that's probably one of the reasons why it's so difficult to talk about race, is because people bringing emotions into it. I think Jason's perspective is so good about how people want to believe that they live in a utopia, and maybe you're allowing your patriotism and your love for your country to kind of cloud the reality of, you know, the cancer that's growing on the country that you love. But if we can't have a conversation because you're emotional about a flag, so you are more offended that somebody would kneel and give a perception of disrespect to a flag and not be upset that the flag that waves over the people that he's kneeling for, that their voices aren't being heard. If you can't hear that, then you're emotionally compromised, and we need to stop and have a conversation about why you emotionally can't hear logic that's being brought out to you.
Well, I think in addition to the emotions being kind of a roadblock for logic, I think even just our paradigm, like our blindness in our paradigm, oftentimes will literally not allow us to see facts that are before our very own eyes. So I think it really takes all of us having a position and a commitment to humility, a position and a commitment to a learner's mindset, as opposed to being fixed in how we see the world and fixed in how and fixed in how we judge other people's situations. My experience at times has been, when I am experiencing even something emotionally, a lot of times people discredit the emotion that I'm experiencing. So they discredit the emotion that I'm experiencing for many reasons. And one of the prominent reasons is because it seems to not make sense to them. Like I need to prove why I am cautious when I approach police with guns. So one day, we had a situation in our neighborhood, and somebody was doing something in the house. My wife and I were both there, and we didn't know what was going on. And there were like SWAT team and FMPD, and they had their guns drawn at a house. And my wife says, "Let's go and check it out. Let's see what's going on." I said,
"White privilege."
Yeah. I said, "Okay, so it doesn't work that way for me." And she really, like, it didn't cross her mind like that. So did I believe that I was going to get shot if I approached them? Not necessarily. I didn't think that it would be wise for me to approach them in a heightened state, considering what I was wearing and considering how I look. Now, she's a Caucasian woman. She's a professional. She had her white jacket on. I think her approaching them would have had a different impact on me approaching them. Not saying that it's right or wrong or good or that they're good or bad. I just realized that possibility. So logic and emotion, a lot of times it's like, so there's a popular saying among some people that facts don't care about your feelings. And therefore it's like, if you can't logically prove to me why you're hurting, or you can't prove to me why you're in pain, then your pain is illegitimate. And the challenge with that is oftentimes because of our paradigm blindness, our view of the world doesn't allow facts to enter in. So if it's only based on facts or only based on emotion, then that can be a very unfruitful and unproductive conversation. I think it's really both and.
So I think it's just so interesting when you're talking about like having to prove things, you know, from your specific context. I think that that's something that a lot of white people don't understand, is the burden of proof is on you. You know, like when you go like when I was reading this story, is like they shot him and it was like, why? They're like, well, because we were chasing him with guns, telling him to stop, and he was running from us. It's like, why? Like, why is it his obligation to obey the commands of, you know, these vigilantes chasing him down with guns? And then in every one of these situations that takes place, it's like a black person gets killed and then they have to prove why they didn't deserve to be murdered.
Yes.
That's right.
You know, and
And they've also got to prove that they haven't done anything wrong in the last 5 years
right.
or 10 years.
Yeah. So even just you saying like I have to prove these things, I have to go through a mental checklist of, okay, how am I dressed? What's their perception going to be of me? Is this a heightened situation? You know, she's in a position where she is going to be less threatening by virtue of maybe her gender, but also her race. You know, and then also like the clothes that she's wearing. And why do we live in a society where that is like a series of line items you have to go through and examine whether or not you can engage in a situation? That's
with the Trayvon Martin issue, it was the hoodie, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was the hoodie that he was wearing.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you kidding me? Everyone's got a hoodie.
Yeah, I know. But the hoodie happened to be on the wrong ethnicity. That's the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's insane. Yeah.
And that when you put the hoodie up, that automatically, if you're a black person putting a hoodie up, that communicates ill intent.
That's right.
And the bad part about that story, the horrifying part of that story for me is how I felt cut and dry that was as well. But then you had so many people that stood up for George Zimmerman. He was just protecting his neighborhood, and this kid was acting shady. And what was it they found in his bag? They found like pot or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Didn't matter.
Yeah.
But
so when they checked out his internet history, they found some dodgy things in that as well.
George Zimmerman's?
Yeah, George Zimmerman's.
Did you hear what happened afterwards? Like after everything had settled down and he was hard up for some money, he sold the gun that he used to kill Trayvon Martin. Like and was like, this was the famous gun, and like profited off of that.
Interesting.
And he said, okay, so this is me just going off of memory. He also was threatening somebody online and said, you know what happens to people that threaten me or something like that.
That's right. His brother got involved as well.
Yeah. So a monster, just a horrible monster. But like the fact that was even a narrative that was in question, the fact that we have to wait until years after the event and see him profiting from the murder weapon, seeing him having these conversations, and it takes years before we're like, okay, maybe there was more to this story than we thought, or our initial emotional response to it. We have to get quicker on that, to look at the facts and not examine them through the lens of our biases or our perspectives.
And that's a good point, because you can't get there until you deal with your biases and perspectives. Right. That's the problem. Right. It takes the guy mouthing off years later for some people to think, well, maybe there was more to it than meets the eye. Right. I mean, think about the O.J. Simpson case. Not being funny, everyone saw it for what it was. Right. Whether you supported him, whether you was happy he got off, or whether you wasn't happy he got off. See, I don't think black people's reaction to him getting off was, you know, here's a innocent man that's now been found guilty. I think it was just you'd had the, what's the incident that happened in LA just before that? The Rodney King incident. Yeah, you had all the history of the LAPD and corruption. It was a lot bigger than just OJ's, but we all saw it clearly. Sure. Of course it was, we all believed, I mean, we had the emotional and intellectual capacity to say, well, actually, he probably did do it, but it's one up for black people, because this is one of those times when, you know, we beat the system, so to speak. Right. You know what I'm saying? A lot of white people take a lot longer to get there. Right. And remember the guy with the shotgun. Yeah. So we're not talking about, you know, and there's three of them. There's at least three of them in vehicles, and this guy's jogging on the road. He's wearing a T-shirt and basketball shorts. Yeah. He's unarmed.
And so for many people, you know, where our experience is not going from tragedy to tragedy, and these aren't like isolated experiences. These are experiences that we have on daily, weekly, monthly bases. Right. So it's not, okay, Trayvon Martin, and then Alton Sterling, and then the I Can't Breathe, and then now this is like the fourth thing in the past 5 years. This might, for some people, be the fourth thing this week. Right. Yeah. Wow. You know, and it really encourages me that I've seen many pastors and leaders really open themselves up to taking a stand and taking ownership of this issue. Because, like we said in the beginning, that it really is going to take a collective effort if something really is going to be transformed. And the transformation that we're after is not that every racist is in jail or that every criminal is off the street, but that the very fabrics of our nations and our world will be touched and transformed by the love of Christ, and that the evil that exists in people's hearts will be totally eradicated because the goodness of God brings people to repentance. And then my wife said this morning, like, do you think that's possible? I said, yes, I believe that it's possible for racism to be totally eradicated and extinct. And I'm aware of the reality that we live in a fallen world. And just like it's possible that everyone can be saved, the reality is there is a freedom of choice, so we know that God's not willing that any should perish, and people choose the sinfulness of this world and cherish that over the love and the goodness and the mercy of Christ. So I believe that the love of Christ can transform people, and the opportunity for the Black community is, and it's very challenging, but the opportunity before the Black community is to walk in love and to walk in humility and to walk in vulnerability and to walk in risk and say, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what's going on for me. This is what I'm afraid of. This is what I'm concerned about. This is what I see. This is how I feel. And choose to walk in love and not fear, and choose to walk towards healing and not just living out of anger. So this morning I had a powerful encounter with God in my office, and I was touched, and I was crying, and I just had, I was sensing this overwhelming sense of sorrow and this overwhelming sense of grief. Like I was grieving the loss of Ahmad. I was grieving his loss, and I was sensing the grief of even the entire Black community. I was grieving the feeling or the belief that I have that many people don't understand and are not willing to understand what I'm going through. I was grieving so many things, and I was reminded of the scripture that Jesus was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And I just encountered the love and joy of God this morning so powerfully. And my wife came to the office. She heard me, and she wrapped her arms around me, and she prayed for me, and we just wept together, and we just cried together. And the pain that I was experiencing was so strong. And yet the joy and the hope that I was experiencing was also so strong. So I think that the Black community has an opportunity. The Black people who are in church has an opportunity to walk in love, walk in forgiveness, so that we can actually, like what Jesus says, bring his kingdom that exists in the heavens onto the earth. And somebody said color blindness. I'm not sure if that was Pastor Daniel or Pastor Clement. But the intent behind that, which I've heard, I don't see you as a Black person, like I don't see your color. I believe the intent behind that is to say that I don't have judgments toward you because of your race, and the impact to that is that you don't value and appreciate my uniqueness by saying that you don't see that I'm a Black man. Yes, I'm a kingdom citizen. Yes, I'm washed and I'm covered by the blood. Amen. That's where my identity is rooted. And there are so many things that I am in addition to that. And a Black man is one of them. Yep. So to say, I don't see you as a Black man says that I don't see your concerns. I don't see your cares. I don't see the things that concern you, because to me, Black is not a part of your identity. And while that's a secondary identity, it is indeed an identity. So I think that would really serve the church, that would really serve our society, to understand that we can walk in unity and not have to be conformed to the same anything, to the same race or to the same whatever situation that's at hand.
Yeah. And so, Pastor Jason, I hear what you say, and I agree with that. The thing you said about it's an opportunity for Black people to walk in love and forgiveness. I actually think black people are very forgiving.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder, and I want to choose my words carefully here. I wonder whether we're forgiven to a fault, knowing that the most common topic I ever preach about is forgiveness. Do you know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
I've preached on forgiveness probably more times than any other topic. But I don't think our problem is a lack of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I was in South Africa just after the apartheid thing happened, and there was a lot of Afrikaans leaving South Africa because they fully were aware of the potential retribution for what they themselves had been a part of in the previous 2, 3, 4 decades. And of course, it didn't happen. Nelson Mandela comes out, what a great man. And, you know, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and that did a lot of good. And so, so I think, generally speaking, black people actually are quite forgiving, sometimes to a fault. I think the problem with the church, though, we need to get our own house in order.
Mm-hmm.
As again, the most harm ever done to me in my life that I can think of was by white people in church. It's not the skinhead down the street. I mean, I went to Poland. I went to Warsaw, and it freaked me out because I went to a market where all these neo-Nazi looking dudes were with the bald heads, the bomber jackets, the Dr. Martin boots, the skin-tight jeans. I thought I was at a blinking racist rally, and I'm the only black guy there. It was almost like they didn't see me. It was almost like, in other words, that's just how they were. That was just how they looked in that part of Poland. In fact, they were selling me stuff, saying, "Hey, come buy some of our stuff." And I had some great time shopping over there. And it's a bizarre thing that actually the people who stereotypically I should be afraid of, no, the ones I'm afraid of carry a Bible. They believe in Jesus. They believe those are the ones. So you're right. The church should be leading. The world shouldn't be leading the church in this issue of social justice. The problem is the church has got to get its own house in order. What's it that I think it was Frederick Casey Price said many years ago, that Sunday is the most segregated time in America.
Mm-hmm.
Hispanics go to the Hispanic church, white people go to the white church, black people go to the black church. And so if we're going to lecture the world and our society on racial reconciliation, we've got to put our own house in order. There's some major questions. The Southern Baptist group, one of the largest Christian groups in America, I believe, had their first black president about 6, 7, 8 years ago. That was a major issue. The Southern Baptists were heavily involved in the slave trade. Mm-hmm. Majorly involved. In our country, the Church of England, majorly, reverends, priests owned slaves in Britain. It's crazy. And so I think there's something about us having to work out, our own issues in the church.
Yeah.
Before we can begin to explore it, and otherwise we're just being hypocrites, Jesus is going to say to them, listen, do what they tell you to do, just don't do what they do.
Right.
Okay. Because that's, to me, I think the church, the wider church, I'm not talking about the local church, I'm talking about the broader church, needs to practice this big time before we can even hope to have impact with the society in which we're in.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good way to end the conversation, is talking about how what the church should be doing, how the church can lead, take a stance, how the church can make a difference. Jason, I loved your heart when you were talking, because I just see how much love you have for God and the kingdom of God, and for people. And I really appreciate what you said. I feel like maybe somebody's going to get saved watching what you were talking about earlier. I don't know. It's going to change a life, I think. So what can we do while being hopeful, while, resting in God and knowing that we are kingdom citizens, all of that. But, and I do believe that primarily, I think that sometimes we get really bogged down on the things of this earth, and we need to be more kingdom minded. But at the same time, while we are citizens of heaven, we're still residents on earth.
We are sojourners. Yes, we are.
And so we need to do the best that we can as Christians to not just preach the gospel, but live the gospel. And so how do we live the gospel when it comes to, living alongside of people that have different, contexts than us, or, come from a different background, different culture, whatever that looks like? How can we do better as a church right now in the season to lead the way, in how we love one another? Because that's how we show to the world that we are his, and how we love one another. So how do we do that better? If somebody's watching this right now, I don't know if they watched the whole hour, but if they made it to the end, what is something that they can leave this conversation with, and help make this world a better place, and be unified one with another?
I would say just have one conversation at a time. There are people that we know have different opinions, viewpoints, and experiences than we do. There's a possibility that they're willing to share that. If we create, or if a safe place is created for them, there's a possibility that that individual will be willing to be vulnerable, open, and transparent. So I know myself, for one, I'm very passionate about social justice, which I also believe is not just social justice. I believe that it's like biblical justice, because even all throughout the scriptures, Jesus was about bringing justice to society. So I don't think it's just social justice. I think it's really rooted in biblical truths. But just have one conversation at a time. Ask people who are learning and exposed to different ways of life and different experiences than you are. What are you reading? What are you learning? What do you experience that you wish I knew? Or what are you learning, maybe? Or what are you watching that you wish I would watch, that you think would just give me insight into your world, into your reality? Many times a week I come home and I'm like, babe, I watched this conversation, about what it's like to be Black in America, and this really resonates with me. Please sit down and watch it. And she will sit down and watch it. Or, hey, I read this article, please watch it. So she's, for me, that person that she's really open. And she is one of few people that I can probably count on one hand that initiates conversations with me. Hey, as an African American, although my parents were born in Haiti, what's it like? What are you experiencing right now? What are you going through right now? So this was a very traumatic experience. What happened with Ahmad? Maybe call somebody that is passionate, or that you believe is passionate, or that you believe might be affected, and maybe have some thoughts or feelings about it, and just ask them what they're feeling. Just create a safe place to be open, to learn, and then along with the conversation, how can I help you? How can I partner with you? How can we work in this together to actually affect change in our nation?
Right. So good. Pastor Clement?
Yeah, I mean, certainly having the conversation is critical. I think the most effective form of changing anyone's behavior in South Asia is, coming to Christ, being born again, confessing your sins. And that would certainly be a great place to start. I think, again, how do we begin this? I think the church needs to have an internal in-house family meeting where we talk about this. One of the books I mentioned that I preached this subject maybe 8 years ago, because I read the book by John Piper called Bloodlines.
Yes, great book.
Yeah, a powerful book. And he's telling me, he's writing about his own experiences in the South. He was raised, they had the black maid, and one of their family members, his sister, gets married, and they invited the maids to the church, to the wedding, somehow not thinking she's going to show up, but she shows up, but they don't know where to put her. And so this guy is a very significant leader in certainly the evangelical world in America, and he's raised in a very difficult and turbulent times. I think there's a number of significant Bible colleges that need to have conversations about some of their practices in the past. And, historically, you can see there's some well-known Bible colleges that had rules as part of their institutions about segregation, etc. Because, again, we're meant to be leading this. We're not following society. We're meant to be leading society. But I think we all need to admit that all of us have racism, prejudice of some sort, bias in all of us. And I think it starts with all of us coming to the cross, recognizing it, repenting of it, and then the outworking of that is reconciliation, trying to make things right, trying to address those issues in our own heart. And I think that's where it starts with.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you both for having this conversation with me. I know it's interesting trying to make it work with everybody's schedule and everything. So I appreciate that so much. I think these conversations are helpful for us to talk together. I mean, as we're brothers in Christ. Pastor Clement, you're from Britain. Ancestrally, Jason, you're from Haiti. I'm from all over Europe. Just every Caucasian ethnicity in there is just mixed in. So I mean, it's but at the same time, we're all sons of God, and
Yes.
I value you guys. I have so much respect for you guys, for your churches, for what you guys do, for your hearts, just to have this conversation. And I hope it was meaningful. If somebody watches, I hope it's meaningful for at least one person. And I hope that we're able to go and make a difference. I think that it's interesting because it's kind of like right now you take the coronavirus as an illustration. We talk about quarantine so that we can flatten that curve. When somebody has the virus, we want to distance from that because we don't want it to infect us or contaminate us. I think we can treat racism in a similar fashion where we just socially distance from racist ideologies, from racist perspectives.
That's really good.
Flatten that curve, you know what I mean, as we go on. So thank you guys so much for having this talk with me. I hope you guys have a great day with your family. Pastor Jason, as you go to your daughter's birthday party today, so let your family know I love and appreciate you guys, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again soon.
I sure will. Thank you so much, Pastor Daniel, for the opportunity.
And
Pastor
Pastor
Clement,
Daniel,
thank you.
Yeah,
Bye, guys.
thank you for hosting this. This is a great idea, and I pray this will inspire lots more conversations and trigger many more conversations. God bless, guys.
All right, take care, guys. Bye.
Bless you.
Bless you.
I hope that conversation was as enlightening to you as it was to me. I want to let you know the conversation is not going to stop here. I believe that we really need to lean into this issue as a church. I believe that strongly. And so we're going to have a conversation tomorrow with some folks from our church that are of different ethnic backgrounds. And we're going to use it as an opportunity for us to learn and to hear from people that are a part of our Victory family. And on Sunday, I'm preparing a message that I think is really going to help us grow through this situation. It's going to help us as a church to learn how to better live like love. I really encourage you to tune in this Sunday for a special message on what our country is facing on the issues of racial reconciliation. Don't miss it. I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for a special conversation, as well as Sunday for a special message. God bless.